Welcome to Weather and Wine, the video podcast where we peel the onion on the concept of risk and dig a little bit deeper. We're talking about risk from four macro trends being trade, technology, weather and workforce. My name is Karl Roquet and today I'm joined by Aon Vapaavuori, who has a solid background when it comes to planning cities and also works as an advisor within urbanization. Aon is prior mayor of Helsinki and also held positions within the Finnish government. Very welcome, Aon, today for this discussion.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure being here with you.
Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to dig deeper a little bit on how we can build resilience for the future and actually zooming in a little bit on the role of cities. And with that context, how cities actually can help assist us to drive the change when it comes to climate transition, how it also affects the core infrastructure of our economy, how we can attract the right talent by building and designing cities in a more proper way going forward. And also we're going to touch a little bit on how cyber risks are linked to how we actually live and act together as citizens of the modern cities. Just jumping into the first question and the first topic that I have, and that is actually cities as leader in the climate transition. And here I'd like to get your view on, based on your background as being the mayor of Helsinki, how you see that we can balance the discussion or the balance how we actually can drive sustainability together with the question of economic growth. And that is, of course, a challenge that we see in many aspects, but really interesting from a city perspective. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
If I give you like two examples of cities' role in tackling climate change. The first one comes from Helsinki, and here, of course, you need to take into account that circumstances differ quite a lot from country to country and from city to city. But in Helsinki, the three main sources for emissions are energy production, energy efficiency of buildings, and traffic. And you could say that in all of those three pillars, the city is actually a more relevant player than the Finnish state. Of course, in our case, it is based on the fact that we own the energy company, which is active in Helsinki, which is of course not the case everywhere, but in Helsinki it is the case. Secondly, we are in charge of building codes, which then of course have a big impact on energy efficiency of buildings. And thirdly, of course, because of zoning and other, reasons, we are the main player as far as traffic are concerned. So you could say that even if the Finnish state is a relevant player, even if the private sector is a relevant player, even if, you have several other players, the city itself may and most probably is the single most important player in our society. I know that this is not the case everywhere, but you could say that everywhere cities have a big role to play in climate change. Another example takes us 8 years backwards when Donald Trump started his first term as president in the US. You remember that even then he was withdrawing US from the Paris Agreement. And at that time, I think roughly 70 mayors around US, with the lead of Eric Garcetti, who was the mayor of Los Angeles at that time, who came out and said that the president of US may do what he does, but we as cities stay committed to tackling climate change. And actually 4 years afterwards, when the term of Donald Trump finished at that time, US was actually not falling that much short from their theoretical commitments regarding climate change due to the fact that cities also in US states and the private sector in large state committed.
And you talk a little bit about it, Aon, actually, the responsibility that lies within the city and what actually stays within federal or even government ownership, but also looking into us as citizens. How can we improve our way when it comes to driving sustainability and coexist? Who is driving in the driving seat when it comes to actually driving sustainability, but yet also keeping the economic growth?
People who believe in regulation. I think that those who are having the power to regulate are on the driving seats. Then there are people who say that it is actually technology which is driving the change. And then there are some who point out that awareness building, and I mean the people in large, the community, is actually in the driver's seat. I think it is a combination of all of those three. In some cases, it's evident that you need regulation, or at least helps you a lot. In some other cases, and I could say in large, it's evident that without technological improvement and development, it becomes much more difficult, even impossible in some cases. And then thirdly, without the pressure you get from the society or community, of course, the interests both for the business as well as for the regulators would be much smaller. So when you are trying to tackle one of the biggest, maybe biggest challenges the mankind has ever faced, it is clear that there is no a silver bullet, there is not a single answer. You can't say that it is A, B, or C, it's all of those together.
Without having those silver bullets, as you refer to, Helsinki has often been seen as a leading city when it comes to sustainability. And when you first came into office, which were the major risks that you saw were facing Helsinki, and how did you tackle them?
In the Nordic states, you could say that we have the luxury that citizens in large are supporting policies which are actually quite progressive. And you could say that in our case, one of my main risks was from the very beginning that the citizens, the community, do not think that my administration would be like strong and progressive enough. That is certainly one challenge. Another one is linked to building codes. You could say that when you are building totally new buildings or constructing totally new buildings, it is in today's world relatively easy to make them, quite carbon neutral, even net zero buildings. But when you are renovating the existing building blocks, that is a much more challenging task. And that there, one of the risks is still that if you have too progressive building codes, it may lead to other problems within the buildings with bad indoor quality and that the expenses would be too high. And the third risk is linked to traffic. At least in Helsinki, we had a very strong opposition, trying to and going against all kind of limitations of car traffic, and pointing out that it has negative economic effects if you try to limit cars in the city center, which partly certainly also was true. So it's always a balance where you should be progressive enough to really make a change, but at the same time being also sensitive for what are the economic consequences. In the long term, it's quite evident that even the economic consequences are positive, but in the short term, in a way that you can keep the public support which you have.
I find it's really interesting to hear about this, soft approach to regulations and actually how we're able to enforce those by actually being pragmatic around what kind of regulations we can apply. Given your pragmatic approach, are there any success stories that you can share, or how we can actually do this better in other parts of the world to copy with pride what you've done and succeeded with in Helsinki?
I think one of the success stories for us was that we recruited, I don't remember how many, maybe 10 experts whose only task was to give advice to owners of buildings how to renovate their buildings in a cost-efficient way where they can optimize the improvement in energy efficiency with as low costs as possible. It's not an easy task. You can imagine that owners of buildings were afraid of these renovations. They had fears that it would cost too much. They had fears that the construction market is not able to make that happen. But then when we have real experts advising free of charge all of those who were considering a energy efficiency renovation, and I think that was a very cheap way for a city to really make a difference.
Just shifting the topic somewhat, because technology is becoming more and more widespread. We're living technology in our day-to-day life. Going back to how it works in cities, are there any cyber risks related to how we implement technology-driven resources and assistances in the urban planning that you have come across?
Absolutely. I think there is a cyber risk everywhere. We are living in a world where all systems of daily life are interconnected in a way where you are using a lot of data, of course. And because of that, there is always a cyber attack or cyber risk present. Of course, the easiest way to understand that is electricity. You could say that without electricity, there are quite few things which actually would work in today's world. And the whole energy network is, of course, always in risk for cyber attacks.
And would you say that we are on top of these risks enough, or is this an educational route for us to go actually when it comes to addressing cyber risks related to cities?
I'm quite sure that we, in the Nordic states especially, we are better off than maybe the rest of the world. But even for us, it's important to understand that the world is changing more rapidly than ever before. Digitalization, AI, blockchains, and all of those new technologies are changing the world more rapidly than ever before in the human history. And that you also have room for both accidents and criminal minds. You could say that even if we are quite well off today, you need to understand that that is the situation today. It's not the situation tomorrow or next summer or a year from now if you are not continually improving and putting emphasis on these issues.
Moving into another topic, being actually how climate change impact the economic infrastructure of cities. I would be quite interested to learn a little bit more, Jan, about what you see are the biggest climate-related challenges when it comes to the infrastructure of a city, the backbone of how a city works.
You could say that the global warming and that the consequences of that is, of course, the biggest economic risk. One of the most obvious big risks are, of course, the rise of sea level. Most of also our inhabitants in the Nordic countries are living next to the coast. But then there are several other ones as well. The temperature in our cities during wintertime will more and more be around zero. Just some degrees above, some under, some above. Then we have slush, then we have ice, then we have water, then we have ice, and then so on, which causes actually quite severe challenges for the cities. The first one is that your roads are slippery and in bad shape, and that causes challenges both for cars, trams, buses, but especially for pedestrians. The head of our health department told me that now it will be 60 more operations in our main hospitals only during one day. The second one, which is maybe not that obvious, but I think quite easy to understand, is that different kind of buildings do not like when it changes all the time. When it's wet, then ice, those kind of changes cause severe problems. Tackling climate change is maybe not yet, but will certainly be the biggest business in the whole world. And the forerunners within this field are absolutely gaining, if not already now, but even more in the future.
Looking into the economy of the city, what kinds of investments do you foresee? You know, how are we to respond by investment to actually mitigate any risks and negative consequences out of this?
The most obvious one is, of course, that is the policy everywhere in the Nordics today. When you get permits to totally new buildings, they need to be at least what it is, maybe 1.5 meters or 2 meters above the sea level and so on. But of course, you have a big part of the cities which are built earlier and you don't have that case. And then in order to understand that if the sea level rises at 0.5 meter or 70 centimeters or 90 centimeters, which areas will be in risk and why and where the water comes from and so on. And then, I mean, that gives a maybe basis for innovation and understanding and developing maybe some measures to mitigate that.
Given your experience, do you feel that the private sector, the business side of the society, plays an active role in actually driving this? Or is it only up to the governments or the steering heads of a city?
More than 90% of all innovation takes place in the private sector. But the public sector is still the one who bears the main responsibility. And whose role is to encourage innovation. And this is something which we have not understood that well, even in the Nordic cities, is that the best results come from a genuine, good public-private partnership, where the city is like acting as the platform and enabler and partner for the private sector, which then, in most cases, have the like concrete tools and technologies in order to solve the problem. I mean, regulation is, of course, the one of the best examples. Tighter regulation somehow forces the private sector to find the solutions, for example, to make more energy efficient buildings or more energy efficient cars or so on. A good, trustworthy collaboration between the public and private sector is, I think, the secret here. Even we have a lot of room for improvement there. I think that we could have a lot to gain as well as small, transparent, relatively agile societies.
Moving topic a little bit, because climate change doesn't only affect our infrastructure and our economy, it actually has an impact on how we work with talent and actually the inhabitants of our cities. For an aging population with different needs, global talent shortages, etc., both business and cities need to work in a new way to actually both attract and retain its talent within the cities to maintain innovation. Jan, turning to you on this topic, how can the Nordic cities work better to become attractive and also be more attractive as seen on a global market to attract and retain talent?
One of my favorite quotes comes from 2,300 years ago. It was the Greek philosopher Aristotle who said that people move into cities in order to get a job and earn their living, but they stay there in order to live a good life. We have been thinking that the talents all around the world are primarily seeking for good jobs and good companies. And that has been the case, certainly, and it's partly even today. But I think that more and more they are seeking for a good life. They are seeking for a good environment to live their life and raise their families. And there I think that all the Nordic cities, which are sustainable ones, safe, resilient, easygoing, well-organized.
And would you say that we're doing that enough? Of course, from a Nordic perspective, creating an artificial sun would be high on the agenda actually to get rid of the darkness. But are the Nordic main cities doing enough when it comes to attracting talent, would you say?
The competition is really tough in today's world. So you could say that you are never doing enough. But you could say that the product itself is in relative good shape. But due to the tough competition, due to the relatively small size of all of us, the people around the world, the talents, are just not aware of that, and how nice and good we actually are. So it's more like a marketing issue than a issue of improving the product itself.
And when you touch upon the marketing issue, swapping a little bit to businesses, what are the biggest barriers, would you say, for businesses today to actually attract talent?
One of the biggest challenges most of the Nordic cities have is that we are not international enough. And what I mean with that is that the English-speaking labor market is not as large as it could and should be. That is something which we have seen in Helsinki very clearly. That I remember when I'm asking really best global companies that are they able to attract global talents? And then the answer usually is yes, as long as they are singles. But when they have their family with them, it is also a question of getting a good English school, English kindergarten maybe, and even more important, to get a job for their spouses as well. And that need to be a job where you can do that in English in most cases. And there I think that we have a handicap in all Nordic cities, least in Copenhagen and Stockholm, but even there is a room for improvement.
We've been touching upon IT, innovation, technology to some extent, but I'd like to go in and dig deeper into the topic of cyber and cybercrime. When it comes to actually working within the cities, we have to cope with the threats from cybercrime a lot, and we discussed this a little bit earlier, but would you say that the cities in the Nordics are prepared when it comes to mitigating the risk of cybercrimes?
We are better and better prepared, but so are the criminals. In today's world, you can never be, honestly speaking, you can never be prepared to 100%. And what is even more important to understand is that the world is changing all the time. And that even if we were prepared today, we are not prepared 6 months from now if we are not making a improvement all the time. As a mayor, I remember talking to the chairman of Nokia about artificial intelligence and what he think that I should do in order to make the city better prepared for the development in that field. And I remember him telling me that, yes, it is important that you have a unit which really specializes on this, but even more important is that you educate all your people to have the basic knowledge about artificial intelligence. And what we did was we started a mandatory training for the middle management in order to educate them all to understand the basics of artificial intelligence, to understand that even if they are not experts in it, they need to understand how it, in theory at least, can be helping them in solving their everyday problems. And I think that the same goes for cybersecurity, because then you have ears and eyes all around the city and all around the system to at least understand that we may have a problem somewhere, and then contact the experts.
Using that as a segue into, unfortunately, the situation with proximity to armed conflicts, what would you say is the cities and the current society's preparedness to actually respond to that, what we're seeing today with war in Ukraine, etc.?
I think it's better in Finland than in the other Nordic countries.
What are you doing good?
You could also say that due to obvious reasons. You could say that those countries which have that one big Eastern country, which name I'm not mentioning now as a neighbor, they have been better prepared already for a long time. So you could say Finland, Baltics, Poland, Turkey, they have historically been spending more on that than those who are, say, a little bit more distant.
Is there something in the psychology and mentality of the Finnish people that the other Nordic countries actually can copy to build more psychological resilience towards armed conflicts in the future?
Yeah, I mean, of course, taking one angle, like there are big differences between the general willingness to defend your country, even in the European countries. The Finnish military has organized 3-week-long defense courses for the whole elite of the society, all the way from universities to business life and all administration, where you could say that the whole elite in Finland, undependent on what sector you're talking about. And it's not only a question about increasing the skills and know-how and knowledge about defense issues, but it's also to spread the idea of being patriotic in a constructive, good way.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a combination of all of those.
If you had the opportunity to be mayor or president or whatever in some influential point today, what would your top 3 priorities be on what should we do different to meet tomorrow's risks?
I know that this is a really dull answer, but I think that most important, and actually the maybe biggest secret behind the success of all Nordic societies, is a comprehensive approach and holistic view. You need to understand that everything counts, and that you need to pay attention to a huge amount of different things, not putting them against each other. Creating resiliency in your society is not a media sexy issue. It is a issue of hard work, where you need to put emphasis on all really important issues. Most people know tennis as a game, and it was one of the world famous players, once I don't remember who it was, who was asked that when you have a game where you need several talents, what is your practice or exercise philosophy? And he or she said that, of course, if you need to have different kind of skills, you need to practice them all. But then there are 2 things you need to practice more. The first one is your biggest weakness, because that makes you lose matches. And the second one is your biggest strength, because that helps you to win matches. So yes, comprehensive approach, but understanding that the biggest weaknesses and your biggest strengths are something which you should put maybe even more emphasis on. The second one is the carbon neutral Helsinki strategy, which we worked with in Helsinki during my time. And there, understanding that everything should be based on data. You need to have a proper understanding of what your problem actually is. And then we had the philosophy that if 17% of your problem is because of the traffic, then also 17% of the solutions should be based on traffic. And if 25%, and this is roughly the numbers, are based on energy efficiency of the existing building block, then 25% of the solutions should also be there. Comprehensive approach based on data and science. That is a dull, but however, I think the right answer.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't say it's dull, actually, because it's a little bit the concept of this video podcast, to talk about what we're not talking about enough, because it can appear to be a little bit dull, but it's actually what you're saying, John, going back to basics, deal with the problems one at a time, and be persistent.
Maybe a third example. During my term, we knew the Helsinki City strategy. My idea from the very beginning was that it can't be anything else but being the best in the world in some way. And my first idea was that the green is the most sustainable city in the world. But then I thought that Copenhagen had maybe reserved that already. Then I thought that maybe the smartest city in the world. And then someone told me that Singapore has already stolen that concept. And then we came out and named our strategy as the most functional city in the world. And I remember talking to my own people that it may sound dull, it's not media sexy, but I can guarantee that it's relevant. 2 years afterwards, COVID broke out, and I remember talking to my colleague mayors in some international seminars, and then they came telling me that, hey, Mayor of Helsinki, when you said that a functional city is not media sexy, it actually is really, really media sexy. So you could say that especially when when you are suffering, when you are hitting by like say bad weather or difficulties, then these kind of like basic issues, a safe city, resilient city, functional city, sustainable city, are gaining even more in importance.
Thank you so much, Jan, for this discussion. It's been really great to hear your views. I hope that everyone that's been listening and watching this episode has learned something new about how we actually can tackle the complexity of tomorrow, and also gotten some new tips and tricks from Jan on how to solve it. Thank you so much.